September 8, 1941, forever entered history as the day the siege of Leningrad began. German troops closed the ring around the city, cutting off the last land road. 3 million people, among whom were almost 400,000 children, found themselves trapped. The city turned into a besieged fortress, cut off from main sources of food and fuel. Already in the first weeks of the blockade, supplies rapidly dwindled. By November, the bread ration for workers was 250 grams, and for children and dependents, only 125. This was not bread in the usual sense. Cellulose, oil cake, and sawdust were added to it. There was no heating in the city, no electricity. The water pipes froze. It was especially hard for children. Their thin bodies succumbed faster to cold and hunger. They didn't understand why they couldn't eat their fill, why mothers cried at night, why air raid sirens howled so terrifyingly. Children's faces rapidly aged. Their eyes lost their sparkle, and their voices, their clarity. Leningrad children, carefree and cheerful just yesterday, suddenly grew up many years. The winter of '41 became a time of unbearable trials for the children of Leningrad. Childhood ended in an instant, replaced by a daily struggle for survival. In frozen apartments, the temperature dropped to -10 degrees Celsius. Children slept without undressing, wrapped in all available blankets and clothes. Many families moved into one room to somehow retain warmth. Burjuikas, homemade stoves, installed directly in living quarters, burned anything that could: furniture, books, old things. Orphanages and boarding schools turned into centers of survival. Educators, themselves exhausted to the limit, did the impossible to save their charges. They read them books by the light of oil lamps, invented games to distract them from the constant feeling of hunger, and gave their meager rations to the weakest. "We didn't cry when we wanted to eat," Valentina Leontieva, who was 9 at the start of the blockade, later recalled. "We just became quieter. Our games slowed down. Movements became economical. Mom said we needed to conserve energy. I didn't understand what that meant until I saw our neighbor's daughter Nina simply unable to get out of bed." School lessons continued even in such inhumane conditions. Children sat in coats, hats, and mittens. Ink froze. They had to breathe on the pen nib to make it leave a mark on paper. Teachers, barely standing themselves, tried not only to impart knowledge but also to support the students' will to live. By December '41, child mortality reached terrifying proportions. Dystrophy, scurvy, and pneumonia decimated the city's child population. Babies under 3 years old suffered especially. Their bodies could not withstand hunger and cold. Mothers whose milk ran out desperately sought any opportunity to save their infants. "My younger brother, he was only 4 months old. Mom fed him with a pacifier dipped in sweet water," said Mikhail Glinsky, who survived the blockade as a child. "When the sugar ran out, she just moistened a rag in water. He cried all night, and then stopped. He just looked with big eyes and was silent. That was the most terrifying thing, a child's silence." Doctors noted a special condition of blockade children. They began to resemble small, old people. Their skin wrinkled, eyes sank, limbs thinned. Doctors called it blockade face, when childish features were distorted by suffering and hunger beyond recognition. In orphanages, special, reinforced groups were created for the most weakened. They were given additional food, but it was still catastrophically insufficient. Educators kept grim statistics. How many children didn't wake up in the morning? How many couldn't get out of bed? By January '42, it became clear that without urgent evacuation, the city's child population faced catastrophe. It was then that the idea of a large-scale operation to rescue young Leningraders began to take shape in the highest circles of the front and city leadership. By January 1942, the situation with children in besieged Leningrad became critical. At an emergency meeting of the Military Council of the Leningrad Front, Commander Leonid Govorov for the first time voiced a thought that had been in the air. Children must be evacuated from the dying city at all costs. This idea was immediately supported by Pyotr Popkov, chairman of the Leningrad City Executive Committee, and Alexei Kuznetsov, secretary of the City Party Committee. The decision to evacuate the children was not simple. The city was completely surrounded. The only communication with the mainland was Lake Ladoga, covered with fragile ice and shelled by enemy artillery and aviation. Evacuating tens of thousands of weakened children across this ice road seemed an almost impossible task. "We must save the children, even if it means taking extreme risks," Govorov said at the meeting. "Every day of delay costs hundreds of children's lives." According to the recollections of the meeting participants, the decision was made amidst agonizing doubts. The risk was enormous. Columns of children would become easy targets for enemy aircraft, and the ice could give way at any moment. But the alternative was even more terrible: the continued death of children in the besieged city. On January 8, 1942, a secret decree was signed to begin preparations for the mass evacuation of children across Lake Ladoga. A special headquarters was created to coordinate all actions, headed by Yefrem Fedorova, deputy chairman of the Leningrad City Executive Committee. The headquarters included representatives of the military command, doctors, educators, and transport service employees. The first meeting of the headquarters lasted almost a day. Hundreds of questions needed to be resolved. How to organize the collection of children? How to provide them with food on the road? Which routes to choose to minimize the risk of detection by the enemy? And how to prepare a sufficient number of vehicles? The secrecy of the operation presented particular difficulty. German intelligence was actively working in the city, and the mass movement of children could attract attention. It was decided to conduct the evacuation in small groups, at different times of the day, using various routes. Doctors developed special recommendations for preparing exhausted children for the difficult journey. 2 weeks before the evacuation, children began to receive enhanced rations and vitamin supplements, as much as was possible under the blockade conditions. One of the most difficult issues was the selection of children for the first evacuation groups. Doctors suggested evacuating the strongest first, those who had a better chance of enduring the difficult journey. But many leaders insisted on saving the weakest, those on the verge of life and death. "We cannot choose who lives and who dies," said Yulia Mendeleeva, the city's chief pediatrician, at one of the headquarters meetings. "But we must be honest. The most emaciated children simply will not make it to the mainland. We will lose them along the way." Ultimately, a compromise decision was made to form mixed groups where stronger children could help the weakened and medical personnel could give special attention to the most severely ill. By the end of January 1942, the first stage of preparation was completed. A network of collection points was created in different parts of the city. Medical teams were prepared. Food supplies for the journey were formed, and lists of children and accompanying persons were compiled. Drivers who were to drive vehicles along the ice route received special instructions. The operation was given the code name Zvezdochka, Little Star, at the suggestion of one of the headquarters officers, who recalled what he called his little daughter, who remained in evacuation. Lake Ladoga became the sole thread connecting besieged Leningrad with the mainland. When the water surface froze in November of '41, the legendary Road of Life was born. An ice track 30 kilometers long from the village of Osinovets to Kobona on the eastern shore. The creation of this road was a true engineering feat. The first scouts went out onto the ice on November 12th, a group of military personnel led by Captain Nefedov. They walked, probing every meter, measuring the thickness of the ice. The initial data was disappointing, only 15 centimeters. A minimum of 20 was required for trucks to pass. Time did not wait. The city was dying of hunger. On November 17th, horse-drawn carts ventured onto the ice, and on November 22nd, the first convoy of 60 trucks set off. These were the legendary Polutarokas, Gaz AA with wooden cabs. They were lightened by removing everything superfluous, even the doors, to reduce pressure on the fragile ice. Drivers of the first vehicles recounted that they drove literally on water. The ice sagged, cracked, and waves spread out on both sides of the wheels. The distance between vehicles was strictly regulated, no less than 100 meters. Movement was only possible in first or second gear, without sudden braking or turns. Gradually, the route expanded and strengthened. By January of '42, several routes were already operating on Ladoga. The main one, from Osinovets to Kabona, auxiliary ones, from Lysinos to Karedzi, and from Vaganovo to Kokorevo. Along the road, every 5 kilometers, wooden markers with lanterns were installed, and heating and medical aid stations were equipped. But the ice track remained mortally dangerous. The main threat was polynyas, areas of open water formed due to underwater currents or bombings. Vehicles went under the ice along with drivers and cargo. Special emergency rescue services were created to lift them, but they were not always able to help in time. German aviation constantly bombed the ice road. Bomb craters quickly filled with thin ice, which became a deadly trap for subsequent vehicles. To protect the route, anti-aircraft batteries were installed along it, and Soviet fighters constantly patrolled the sky. Another danger was hummocks. Piles of ice formed when the lake froze. They damaged the undersides of vehicles and punctured tires. Road services worked around the clock to combat these obstacles, leveling the track. The throughput of the road of life varied depending on weather conditions and ice thickness. On the best days, up to 3,000 vehicles passed through it per day. Trucks went to Leningrad with food, ammunition, fuel, and brought back factory equipment, and of course people, primarily children, women, the elderly, and the wounded. The road also operated at night. The risk of air raids decreased during dark hours. Drivers navigated by markers and dim lanterns, often moving in complete darkness to avoid revealing themselves with headlights. Many drivers, after hours of icy journeys, lost spatial orientation and suffered from hallucinations. It was along this dangerous road that thousands of Leningrad children were to be evacuated. For them, it was the only path to salvation, a path where every kilometer could be the last. The preparations for evacuating children across Lake Ladoga demanded exceptional secrecy. German intelligence was highly active in the city, and any mass movement could attract enemy attention. The command of the Leningrad front developed a multi-layered system of secrecy. Information about routes and travel times was given only to immediate implementers a few hours before the operation began. Documents were encrypted with code designations, and radio communication was minimized. To camouflage the movements of children's groups, false convoys and imitations of regular military transports were created. Special units of military counterintelligence, quote, tracked any information leaks and thwarted attempts by enemy agents to uncover preparations for the evacuation. The planning of each transportation began with the meticulous development of travel routes. For the evacuation of children, not the main routes of the road of life were used, but auxiliary ones, less visible from the air. Convoys with children were sent predominantly at night, when enemy aviation activity decreased. Vehicles moved with extinguished headlights, orienting themselves only by dim light beacons, visible only from a close distance. Particular attention was paid to the organization of assembly points. They were located in school basements, bomb shelters, semi-basement premises of residential buildings, places hidden from aerial observation. Each point had emergency exits and shelters in case of an air raid. Children were brought to assembly points in small groups of 5 to 7 people, accompanied by educators, trying not to attract attention. Quote 1 recalled Anna Petrova, an educator from orphanage number 23. Quote 2, The formation of children's groups was carried out according to a special system. Children of different ages were included in one group, so that older children could help younger ones. 2 adult escorts, usually a teacher and a medical worker, were assigned to each group of 15 to 20 children. They underwent special training on actions in extreme situations, how to provide first aid for frostbite, what to do during an air raid, how to evacuate children from a sinking vehicle. The medical preparation of children for evacuation began several days before departure. Doctors examined each child, determined the degree of exhaustion and the possibility of transportation. The weakest were placed in special infirmaries, where they were given enhanced nutrition from emergency supplies. For children suffering from severe dystrophy, special insulated stretchers were made. Each child received an individual package with a dry ration, rusks, crackers, a piece of sugar. These products were allowed to be eaten only on the command of the escorts. Children were warned in advance about the need to maintain silence and implicitly follow all adult instructions. The salvation of children in besieged Leningrad was the responsibility of ordinary people with extraordinary strength of spirit. Maria Ivanovna Kuznetsova, a caregiver at orphanage number 17, became one of the main heroines of the evacuation. Under her care were 47 children aged from 3 to 12 years. Exhausted by hunger, she continued to give a part of her meager ration to the weakest pupils. "I knew every child as my own," she later recounted. "When we were informed about the upcoming evacuation, I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I made lists of what clothes each needed, who required special food on the road, and who could not be separated from their siblings." The drivers of the polutorok, half-trucks, that transported children across Lake Ladoga displayed miracles of skill and selflessness. Ivan Maximovich Pavlov, a driver with pre-war experience, made 28 trips with children. During one of the journeys, his vehicle came under fire. A splinter pierced the windshield and wounded Ivan in the shoulder, but he drove the polutorka to the eastern shore, saving 30 small passengers. "The scariest part was at night," Pavlov recalled. "You drive in complete darkness, headlights off, orienting only by the markers. The ice cracks. Water sometimes splashes through the cracks onto the cabin, and in the back are children. They are silent, the poor things. They don't even cry. They have no strength. You understand that you are responsible for each one with your head." The medical staff was formed from the city's best pediatricians and nurses. Dr. Elizaveta Sergeyevna Danielevskaya, a pediatrician with 30 years of experience, headed the medical service for the evacuation. She developed special recommendations for preparing weakened children for transportation and protocols for providing assistance in extreme conditions. She wrote in her notes, "Under Danielevskaya's leadership, specialized teams consisting of a doctor and 2 nurses were created, accompanying each large group of children. They carried compact first aid kits with the most essential medicines, glucose, cardiac drugs, painkillers. For the most severely ill children, stretchers with thermal insulation made of cotton blankets were provided. A special role was played by nurses, many of whom were recent schoolgirls. 18-year-old Zenaida Korneva accompanied a group of 26 children from orphanage number 30. During the crossing, an air raid began, and one of the bombs exploded 50 meters from the vehicle. Shrapnel damaged the body, and several children were wounded. Zenaida provided first aid under fire, pressing on a 7-year-old boy's wound while simultaneously calming the other children. Special teams of greeters were formed on the eastern shore of Lake Ladoga to work with the evacuated children. They included doctors, psychologists, and cooks. They received the road-weary little ones, accommodated them in insulated tents and dugouts, fed them hot food, and provided first medical aid. In late January of '42, a quiet, almost imperceptible preparation for evacuation began in the orphanages of Leningrad. Educators were given sealed envelopes with instructions that were forbidden to open until a certain time. Nothing was said to the children. The risk of information leakage was too great. We were summoned to the district education department late in the evening, Anna Mikhailovna Karpova, director of orphanage number 42, recalled. They only said that we needed to prepare the children for relocation. Where, when, no details. We were told to make lists, gather the most essential items, and wait for the signal. The preparation took place in an atmosphere of strict secrecy. The children were told that they were being moved to another building where it was warmer and there was more food. Many didn't believe it. They had been given false hope too often before. 7-year-old Irina Savelyeva wrote in her diary, "The gathering was short. Most children had almost no personal belongings left. Everything that could burn had long gone into the potbelly stoves. Toys, books, family photographs. All of this became a luxury in a city where indoor temperatures dropped to 15 degrees below zero. Many children only had the clothes on their backs. Briefings were conducted in whispers, often at night. The children were explained how to behave on the road, not to make noise, to obey adult commands without question, not to fall behind the group. They were especially thoroughly told what to do during an air raid, how to quickly leave the vehicle, where to run, how to hide," said educator Ekaterina Dmitrieva. The preparation of the youngest children presented a particular challenge. 3-year-olds didn't understand what was happening, why they had to be quiet, why they couldn't cry. For them, a game was invented. Whoever sat quietly the longest would get a candy. There were no candies, of course. There was a tiny piece of sugar, saved by the educator from her ration. Many children had already lost their parents by this time. Others were separated from them for the first time. These goodbyes were, perhaps, the most difficult moments of preparation. Mothers, themselves exhausted to the limit, came to see off their children, not knowing if they would ever see them again. Recalled Viktor Lomakin, who was 9 years old at the time. Groups of 15 to 20 people were formed in the orphanages. Efforts were made not to separate siblings, friends, those who were used to sticking together. 2 adults were assigned to each group, an educator and a nurse or doctor. They received special armbands with code signs, by which they could be identified by evacuation service personnel. Medical preparation was especially important. Doctors examined each child, determining if they could withstand the journey. The weakest were placed in special infirmaries, where they were given enhanced nutrition from emergency supplies. Stretchers with insulation were made for children with third-degree dystrophy. Each child was given a small packet with a dry ration, rusks, crackers, a piece of sugar. These foods were allowed to be eaten only on the command of the escorts. Special drinks were prepared for the youngest, sweetened water in bottles with nipples. One of the most touching stories is connected with the preparation of children from orphanage number 3. Children under 3 years old were there, many of them complete orphans. Nurses sewed a small pouch for each baby, which was hung around their neck. Inside was a note with the child's name and date of birth. We were afraid that the children would get lost on the way, or wouldn't be able to identify themselves, explained senior nurse Vera Nikolaevna. These pouches were their only documents. On the 7th of February, 1942, in the early morning when the city was still asleep, the operation to evacuate the first group of children began. The night was relatively calm. German aviation did not bomb, which was a rarity for besieged Leningrad. The thermometer showed -27 degrees, a frost that became both an enemy and an ally. An enemy, because exhausted children could quickly freeze. An ally, because the ice on Lake Ladoga became stronger, more reliably holding the heavy lorries. From different parts of the city, small groups of children moved towards predetermined collection points. They were led by educators and nurses, trying to avoid open spaces and main streets. The children walked silently, conserving their strength. Many could not walk on their own. They were carried in arms or pulled on makeshift sleds. We left the orphanage at 4 in the morning, Claudia Vasilievna Selezneva, An educator from orphanage number 37 later recalled. 22 children. The youngest was 4 years old. The older ones held the younger ones by the hand. No one cried, no one complained. They only breathed heavily and sometimes stopped to rest. It was only 2 kilometers to the assembly point, but we walked for almost 3 hours. The city was a terrible sight in the pre-dawn twilight. Destroyed buildings, bomb craters, snowdrifts mixed with debris and fragments. Narrow paths snaked between the rubble. The children and their accompanying adults tried to move silently, fearing to attract the attention of enemy observers. It was especially difficult to cross wide avenues and squares. There, the columns became vulnerable to shelling. Such sections of the road were overcome in short dashes, 2 or 3 people at a time. Older children helped the younger ones, sometimes literally dragging them along. We were crossing Nevsky Prospect when the artillery shelling began. Mikhail Stepanovich Ivanov, the driver of one of the cars, recounted. Shells were falling somewhere in the vicinity of the Admiralty. The educator reacted instantly. At her command, the children lay down in the snow, pressing themselves to the ground. They didn't even cry, can you imagine? They just lay there, covering their heads with their hands, as they had been taught. The assembly points were located in the basements of sturdy buildings, bomb shelters, and schools with thick walls. There, the children were given warm tea made from dried carrots, a small piece of bread, a travel ration. Medics examined each child again, paying particular attention to frostbite. Those who were too weak were laid on stretchers. By 7 in the morning, the first groups were ready for departure. They were seated in trucks covered with tarpaulins. Each truck could accommodate up to 30 children along with their escorts. The children were wrapped in everything that could keep them warm: blankets, shawls, old coats. Many children were so exhausted that they could not sit on their own. They were laid in the center of the truck, surrounded by other children, creating a living cocoon of warmth. In my truck there were 26 children and 3 adults, recalled the driver Alexander Nikitin. Before leaving, I went into the truck to check how they were settled. The children were lying and sitting, pressed close to each other. They looked at me with huge eyes, but remained silent. I told them, "Hold on, little ones. Soon there will be warmth and bread." One boy, about 6 years old, answered very seriously, "We'll make it, Uncle. We are strong." The convoys left the city by different routes. The main route lay through the Finland station and the village of Osinovets to the shore of Lake Ladoga. Other groups headed through Rzhevka and Vsevolozhsk to the crossing near Kokorevo. The vehicles moved slowly. Destroyed roads, snowdrifts, detours around bomb and shell craters slowed down the movement. The drivers drove with extreme caution. Every jolt, every pothole on the road caused pain in the exhausted bodies of the children. The trucks often stopped. It was necessary to check how the little passengers were feeling, give them a sip of warm drink, and adjust their blankets. The first convoy with children reached the ice of Lake Ladoga at 11 o'clock in the morning. Ahead lay 30 kilometers of icy path, the most dangerous section of the route. But even this path seemed like salvation after months of blockade hell. On the thin ice of Lake Ladoga, the most dramatic stage of the evacuation of Leningrad children unfolded. The February morning of 1942 was clear, but frosty. The thermometer showed 28 degrees below zero. Columns of trucks carrying children moved slowly along the ice road, leaving behind the besieged Leningrad shore. Ahead lay 30 kilometers of deadly, dangerous path. The ice beneath the wheels breathed like a living thing, recalled driver Nikolai Sokolov. It sagged, it cracked. Sometimes it seemed as if the truck was floating, not driving. Every meter could have been the last. But the most terrifying thing was not the ice, but the sky. Death could arrive from there at any moment. The children were placed in the beds of 1.5-ton trucks covered with tarpaulin. Babies were wrapped in anything that could conserve warmth: blankets, shawls, old clothes. Many were so exhausted they couldn't sit upright. They were laid in the center, surrounded by other children. Educators and nurses constantly checked if the weakest ones were breathing, rubbing freezing hands and feet. The first trucks with children went onto the ice early in the morning, when enemy aviation was less active. But by noon, German planes appeared in the sky. They circled over Ladoga, looking for targets. Anti-aircraft batteries located along the lake's shores opened fire, but it was impossible to fully protect the ice road. "I saw them first," recounted Elena Sergeyevna, a nurse accompanying a group from orphanage number 20. 3 black dots in the sky. They were approaching fast. I screamed at the driver, and he sharply swerved towards the shore, where there was a small forest. The children were silent. Even the smallest ones understood. No noise. German bombers dived onto the ice road. Bombs ripped through the ice, creating huge ice holes. Shards of ice and snow dust flew into the air. Drivers, seeing the attack, dispersed their vehicles, increasing the distance. Many drove off the main route, trying to find shelter near islets or in coastal thickets. "Our truck ended up right in the center of the shelling," recalled Pyotr Ivanovich, the driver of one of the 1.5-ton trucks. "A bomb fell 50 meters ahead. The ice cracked. A wave went through it. I felt the front wheels starting to sink. I jumped out of the cab, flung open the tailgate and yelled, 'Everyone onto the ice, quick!' The educators threw the children out like kittens, and I held them, put them on the ice, and sent them running to the shore. Within seconds, the truck was evacuated. 24 children and 3 adults were on the ice. The 1.5-ton truck slowly sank into the black water. The children, even the smallest ones, didn't cry. They simply had no strength for tears. They stood silently, huddled together, while the educators decided what to do next. At that moment, another truck from the column came to their aid. The driver, risking falling through the ice, drove up to the children stranded on the ice. Almost 50 people were squeezed into the truck bed designed for 20. Children were literally stacked on top of each other. Thus, in an overcrowded truck, they reached the eastern shore. In another column, an even more dramatic situation occurred. A direct shell hit destroyed the ice around 3 trucks. A huge ice hole formed, in which trucks with children ended up. The drivers and accompanying personnel acted with incredible composure. They pulled the children out through the tailgate, passing them chain fashion onto solid ice. "I remember being passed from hand to hand," recounted Anna Petrova, who was 6 years old at the time, many years later. "First, the educator pulled me out from under the tarpaulin, then passed me to some military man, he to someone else. I saw our truck slowly going underwater. Our driver was the last to get out. He jumped from the roof of the cab when only the upper part of the truck remained above the water. Rescue teams, on duty along the route, immediately moved to the scenes of incidents. Special sledges were used to evacuate children unable to walk on their own. The wounded and frostbitten were taken to medical posts located along the shore. Despite all efforts, casualties were inevitable. Some children, too weakened by hunger and illness, could not withstand the cold and died right on the way. Others were wounded during air raids. The exact statistics of casualties during the ice crossing still remain a subject of historical research. One of the most heroic episodes was the story of driver Mikhail Tverdoklebov. During a raid, his truck took a direct hit from a shell fragment in the gas tank. There was a threat of fire. Tverdoklebov, understanding that there were 27 children in the back, did not stop. He continued to drive the burning truck until he reached the shore. Only there, after making sure all the children were evacuated, did he lose consciousness from the burns he sustained. The sky above Ladoga harbored no less danger than the fragile ice beneath the wheels. The German command fully understood the significance of the ice road for besieged Leningrad and did everything possible to sever this thin thread of life. Enemy aircraft made up to 100 sorties a day, attempting to bomb the road and destroy the convoys moving along it. To protect the evacuation convoys with children, a multi-layered air defense system was established. Along the entire route, on both banks of Lake Ladoga, anti-aircraft batteries were positioned. Light anti-aircraft guns and heavy machine guns were mounted on special wooden platforms directly on the ice. "We received a special order," recalled Lieutenant Alexei Smirnov, commander of an anti-aircraft battery. "The command said, 'Vehicles with children will pass through your zone. If even one plane breaks through, you will answer with your head.'" We didn't sleep for days, on duty by the guns in any frost. When enemy aircraft appeared in the sky, an air raid siren sounded along the entire route. Vehicles with children immediately dispersed, increasing the distance from each other. Drivers pulled off the main route, trying to find natural shelters, ice hummocks, snowdrifts, coastal thickets. The children and their escorts froze in complete silence, afraid to even breathe loudly. Fighter aircraft played a special role in protecting the children's convoys. Pilots of the 13th Fighter Aviation Regiment, based at the airfield near Novaya Ladoga, patrolled the sky above the ice road day and night. Despite the enemy's numerical superiority and the better technical characteristics of German aircraft, Soviet pilots displayed miracles of skill and courage. Pilot Viktor Kuznetsov, in one of the battles over Ladoga, shot down 2 German bombers heading towards a convoy with children. When his fighter ran out of ammunition, he rammed a 3rd enemy aircraft. At the cost of his own life, the pilot saved dozens of children's lives. "I saw that battle with my own eyes," recounted nurse Tatyana Voronova, who was accompanying a group of children. "Our car was by the shore. The children lay on the ice under a tarpaulin. Suddenly, airplanes appeared in the sky, ours and German. They circled like terrible birds. Then one of our fighters crashed into a German bomber. Both planes fell somewhere in the distance. The children didn't see it. We didn't let them look up." Despite all precautions, it was impossible to completely avoid losses. On February 9th, a convoy of 5 vehicles with children from orphanage number 38 came under a massive air raid. 2 half-ton trucks took direct bomb hits and sank under the ice with their passengers. The drivers of the other vehicles showed incredible courage in rescuing the children. "I saw the car ahead literally shatter into pieces," recalled driver Ivan Mikhailov. "Ice shards, car wreckage, and children flew in all directions. I braked sharply, jumped out of the cab and ran there. Some children lay on the ice, wounded, shell-shocked, but alive. The teacher and I began to gather them, put them in my car. We saved 11 people that day." Often, the rescue of children occurred literally under fire. Chauffeur Mikhail Tverdoklebov was driving a car with 27 children when a German fighter strafed the convoy. Bullets pierced the cab, wounded the driver in the shoulder, and damaged the engine. The car stopped in the middle of the lake, 5 kilometers from the shore. Tverdoklebov didn't lose his head, one of the rescued children later recounted. He got out of the cab, opened the side and said, "Kids, we need to walk. Those who can, help the weaker ones." He himself picked up the 2 smallest and went first, blazing a trail. We followed him through deep snow. It was very cold and scary. Airplanes circled above us, but for some reason, they didn't shoot anymore. In this desperate situation, fighters from the Emergency Rescue Service, who were on duty along the route, came to their aid. On fast aerosleighs, they reached the group and evacuated the children. Mikhail Tverdoklebov, despite his wound and significant blood loss, did not abandon his charges until help arrived. The most difficult ordeal for the children was not only bombings and shelling, but also the fear of the icy water. Many vehicles fell through the ice, not because of bomb hits, but due to cracks and ice holes that formed naturally, or as a result of previous bombardments. "Our car was the last in the convoy," recalled teacher Nina Petrova. "Suddenly, I felt us falling somewhere. The ice cracked, the car tilted, the driver shouted, 'Jump out!' The other teacher and I began throwing the children onto the ice. The smallest ones were simply passed over the side. The car sank under the water, and we stood on the ice, soaked, freezing, but alive." On the eastern bank of Lake Ladoga, The final part of the rescue operation was unfolding. Here, special reception centers for evacuated children were established in the villages of Kobona, Lavrovo, and Zhikarevo. After a deadly journey across the ice of Ladoga, the exhausted, frozen Leningrad children were met by a veritable army of care. Medics, cooks, educators, ready to do everything for their salvation. When I first saw these children getting off the trucks, it took my breath away, recalled Antonina Ivanovna Petrova, a nurse at the reception center in Kobona. They were like little old men with translucent skin, huge eyes, and hands as thin as sticks. They didn't cry, didn't ask for food. They just watched silently, as if they couldn't believe they were safe. The reception centers were located in school buildings, clubs, and local residents' homes. They were insulated in advance, equipped with bunks and stoves. The first thing done with the arriving children was to warm them. In each center, round-the-clock warmers operated, rooms with constantly burning stoves, where children were wrapped in warm blankets and given hot drinks. A medical examination was mandatory for all evacuees. Doctors worked tirelessly, identifying the degree of exhaustion, frostbite, and other illnesses. Children were divided into groups according to their health. Those in serious condition were placed in hospitals, the rest in common rooms under the supervision of nurses. Many children suffered from second- and third-degree dystrophy, said Dr. Semyon Yakovlevich Fridliand, who headed the medical service in Lavrovo. Their skin was dry and wrinkled, muscles atrophied, and swelling was observed. It was especially difficult with toddlers under 3 years old. They didn't understand what was happening and often refused to eat. The nutrition of the evacuated children was organized with particular care. An emaciated body could not be overloaded. This could lead to death. A special feeding system was developed. First, small portions of liquid food, broths, kissels, pureed porridges, gradually increasing the volume and caloric content. We fed them every 2 hours, but little by little, recalled Ekaterina Dmitrievna Sokolova, a cook at the reception center. Some children cried. They thought the portions were too small. They didn't understand that more food could kill them. Others, on the contrary, ate very slowly, savoring the pleasure, or hid bread in their pockets, a blockade habit. A particular problem was the psychological trauma sustained by the children in besieged Leningrad and during the dangerous evacuation. Many did not speak, did not respond to appeals, and fell into a stupor at loud noises. Some small children had forgotten how to play. They just sat, staring into space. I remember a girl, Nina. She was about 5 years old, said educator Vera Nikolaevna. When I gave her a doll, she looked at the toy for a long time and then asked, "Can I eat it?" It broke my heart to understand what these children had gone through. In the reception centers, children were changed into clean clothes, which were collected from all over the country. Many had the opportunity to wash in warm water for the first time in months. This was a whole procedure. Weakened children were washed lying down, on special tables, so that they would not expend energy. 8-year-old Vera Ivanova, evacuated from orphanage number 42, later wrote in her diary, "We were brought to a big house. It was warm and smelled of soup. Auntie Doctor looked at me and said I was a good girl. Then they washed us with warm water. I don't remember the last time I washed. Probably before the war. They gave me a new dress and said everything would be fine now." Children spent from several days to 2 weeks in the reception centers, depending on their health. During this time, they were prepared for further travel into the depths of the country. The most seriously ill were not transported until their conditions stabilized. Many children, for the first time in long months of the blockade, began to smile right here, on the mainland. Educators organized simple games for them, read books, showed puppet shows, everything to return childhood to those who had lost it. The happiest moment for me was the day when the children in my group started laughing, recalled Maria Petrovna, an educator at the reception center. We were showing them a simple performance with rag dolls. and suddenly laughter broke out, first one little voice, then another. By the end of the show, everyone was laughing. I thought then, if they can laugh, it means they will live. Echelons with Leningrad children left for the east. After the mortally dangerous crossing of Lake Ladoga and temporary stay at reception points on the eastern bank, a new stage of evacuation began. Railway transportation deep into the country. For the children, exhausted by the blockade, a long journey to salvation still lay ahead. Railway trains were formed at the stations of Zhikarevo, Volkov-Stroy, and Tikvin. Special children's echelons consisted predominantly of teplushkas, freight cars, hastily converted for carrying people. Each car was equipped with bunk beds, a burzhuika, a type of potbelly stove, and a tank with drinking water. The cars were insulated with whatever was at hand: straw, rags, plywood. Our echelon was formed for 3 days, recalled Antonina Vasilyevna Korneyeva, who accompanied a group of children from orphanage number 36. 30 to 40 children and 2 to 3 accompanying adults were placed in each car. The weakest were laid on the lower bunks, closer to the stove. Older children helped the younger ones. They were already used to taking care of each other. The blockade had taught them. Medical organization of the transportation presented a particular challenge. A sanitary car with doctors and nurses was attached to each echelon. A stock of medicines, dressings, and disinfectants was also stored there. On the way, doctors daily visited all cars, examining children and identifying those who were ill. The main problem was not only the consequences of dystrophy, but also infectious diseases, said Dr. Mikhail Semenovich Volper, who headed the medical service of one of the echelons. In crowded conditions, any infection could lead to an epidemic. We isolated the sick, disinfected, and monitored cleanliness. It was a constant struggle for the life of every child. Food during the journey was organized according to a special system. At large stations, echelons were met by representatives of local authorities, providing hot food, bread, and milk for the youngest. Between stations, children were fed dry rations, rusks, canned goods, sugar. For toddlers, liquid porridges were prepared on portable stoves right in the cars. 7-year-old Lida Petrova wrote in her diary, "They feed us 3 times a day. They give us soup, porridge, and even bread with butter. I never thought I would see butter again. In Leningrad, we forgot about it. The caregiver says we need to eat slowly, in small pieces. Otherwise, we can get sick." Echelons with evacuated Leningrad children were sent to different regions of the country. The geography of distribution was extensive. From the Urals to Central Asia, from the Volga region to Siberia. The decision on the final destination was made taking into account many factors: the availability of prepared premises for orphanages, the capabilities of local authorities to provide food and medical care, and climatic conditions. The largest number of Leningrad children was received by the Urals, Sverdlovsk, Chelyabinsk, Molotov, now Perm, regions. Here, far from the front line, in industrially developed regions, conditions were created for accommodating dozens of orphanages. In the Sverdlovsk region, more than 40 special boarding schools for Leningraders were organized. A significant number of evacuated children were sent to Siberia, Novosibirsk, Omsk, Tomsk regions, Altai Krai. Here, despite the harsh climate, children found care and attention from local residents, who generously shared their last. We were brought to the Siberian village of Mikhailovka, recalled Viktor Alexeyev, evacuated from Leningrad at the age of 8. Local residents met our bus with the whole village. They cried looking at us, exhausted, pale city children. Every family wanted to take someone in. Women brought milk, eggs, potatoes. One grandmother brought a jar of honey and said, "This is for the weakest ones." In the republics of Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. Orphanages for Leningraders were also located. Here, the children faced an unfamiliar climate, a different culture, and unfamiliar food. But the local population showed incredible care for the little blockade survivors. 10-year-old Tamara Sinitsina, evacuated to Tashkent, wrote in a letter to her aunt, "It's very hot here, and there are many fruits. They feed us grapes and melons. I had never eaten melons before. Uzbek women come to our orphanage and bring flatbreads. They stroke our heads and say something in their language. The caregivers said they call us their children." Throughout the entire evacuation operation from besieged Leningrad, via the ice road of life, over 500,000 people were saved, among whom children occupied a special place. The statistics of saving children's lives are striking in their scale. From January to April 1942, during the most difficult period of the blockade, over 170,000 children of various ages, from infants to teenagers, were evacuated across Lake Ladoga. The first wave of evacuation, which took place from mid-January to the end of February, allowed for the removal of about 60,000 children. These were mainly pupils of orphanages, school children, and preschoolers who had lost their parents or were left with a single parent who could not leave the city. In the spring of 1942, when the ice on Ladoga began to melt and the ice route became unusable, the evacuation temporarily paused. However, already in May, the operation resumed. Now children were transported by water on barges and boats. During the summer of 1942, about 70,000 more children were evacuated. In the winter of 1942–43, when the ice route became operational again, the last large groups of children, over 40,000 people, were evacuated from the city. A comparative analysis of survival rates among evacuated and remaining children in the city shows the effectiveness of the operation. According to medical services, mortality among children remaining in besieged Leningrad reached 30% by the spring of 1942. Among evacuated children, this figure was significantly lower, about 8%. Every third child remaining in the besieged city was doomed, noted Yulia Aronovna Mendeleva, the chief pediatrician of Leningrad, in her memoirs. The evacuation saved tens of thousands of children's lives that would have inevitably been lost. Survival rates among younger children were particularly impressive. In the besieged city, mortality among children under 3 years old exceeded 50%, while among evacuated toddlers, this figure was about 15%. Losses during the evacuation itself were also significantly lower than initially expected. Despite constant air raids, shelling, and the dangers of the ice crossing, no more than 3% of the total number of evacuated children perished en route. This was achieved thanks to the meticulous organization of the operation, the dedication of the accompanying personnel and drivers. The effectiveness of the evacuation is also confirmed by statistics on the subsequent adaptation of children in new locations. Over 95% of evacuated Leningrad children successfully underwent rehabilitation in orphanages and boarding schools in the rear regions. Most of them returned to normal life, continued their education, and after the war, many were reunited with their families. The geographical scope of the operation to save Leningrad children is impressive. Evacuated children were placed in 64 regions of the USSR, from the Urals to the Far East, from the Caucasus to Siberia. The largest number of children were taken in by Sverdlovsk Oblast, over 25,000, Uzbekistan, about 20,000, Kirov Oblast, 17,000, and Altai Krai, 15,000. It is particularly worth noting the efficiency of organizing orphanages for evacuated Leningrad residents. More than 300 specialized institutions were created where children not only received necessary nutrition and medical care, but also continued their education, according to Leningrad educational programs. The destinies of evacuated Leningrad children after the blockade varied, but each story bore the imprint of the ordeal they had endured. Many of them remained orphans forever, Others were able to reunite with their parents, but all, without exception, carried through life the memory of those terrible days and their miraculous salvation. Family reunification after the war became one of the most touching pages of post-war history. Special search bureaus were established across the country, receiving thousands of requests from parents looking for their children, and from children trying to find their relatives. Radio stations regularly broadcast lists of evacuees, and newspapers published search announcements. "I remember the day I found my mother," recounted Elena Vorontsova, who was evacuated from Leningrad at the age of 9. It was in '46. I had already lived in an orphanage in the Sverdlovsk region for 4 years. One day, the teacher called me to the director's office. A thin woman stood in the office. I didn't recognize her. She had changed so much over the years, and she rushed to me, hugged me, and cried. It was my mother. Similar stories occurred throughout the country. Many parents searched for their children for years, visiting dozens of orphanages, reviewing thousands of photographs. Some found their children completely by chance, through a newspaper advertisement, through stories from acquaintances, or even by meeting them on the street in another city. But there were also those who were not destined to reunite with their families. Thousands of Leningrad children remained orphans forever. Their parents died in the besieged city or at the front. For them, orphanages became their true family, and their caregivers replaced their parents. There were 36 children in our group, recalled Mikhail Zverev, a resident of an orphanage in the Altai territory. 32 children were orphans. We clung to each other, became true brothers and sisters. Our caregiver, Maria Ivanovna, said that we were one big family, and it really was so. Many of the evacuated children were adopted after the war. Residents of the rear regions who took in Leningraders grew attached to them, empathized with their fate, and decided to adopt them, even if they had their own children. This was especially common in rural areas, where strong family traditions and a communal way of life contributed to the adoption of orphaned children. The experienced blockade and evacuation left an indelible mark on the health of the rescued children. The consequences of hunger, cold, and psychological trauma affected them throughout their lives. Many developed chronic diseases of the gastrointestinal tract, cardiovascular system, and musculoskeletal system. I was never truly healthy, admitted Anatoly Sergeyev, evacuated from Leningrad at the age of 7. The blockade hunger undermined my body forever. Doctors said that my biological age would always be ahead of my calendar age. At 40, I had the health of a 60-year-old. A special category consisted of children who survived the blockade at a very early age, up to 3 years old. Their physical and mental development often lagged behind the norm. Many of them later suffered from neurological disorders, memory problems, and concentration difficulties. Doctors identified a special blockade child syndrome, a complex of physiological and psychological characteristics typical for those who experienced hunger in childhood. This includes a specific attitude towards food, the habit of eating very slowly, stockpiling food, increased anxiety, and special psychological resilience in crisis situations. Despite all the difficulties, most of the evacuated Leningrad children managed to adapt to peaceful life. They received an education, started families, and found their place in life. Many of them subsequently achieved significant success in science, art, and industry, becoming worthy citizens of their country. It is particularly noteworthy that among former blockade children, there were many doctors, teachers, and social workers, those who dedicated their lives to helping other people. Their lived experience formed in them a special sense of compassion and a desire to support those in need of help. The operation to rescue Leningrad children via the Ice Road of Life became one of the most heroic pages of the Great Patriotic War. Decades later, we continue to comprehend the significance of this feat, accomplished by ordinary people in inhumane conditions. The story of the evacuation of children from besieged Leningrad is not just a military operation. It is a symbol of the triumph of humanity over the brutality of war. In those terrible days, thousands of adults, educators, doctors, drivers, pilots, anti-aircraft gunners, risked their own lives for the sake of saving children. Their heroism showed that even in the most severe conditions of the blockade, under bombings and shellings, amidst deadly hunger and cold, people retained essential human qualities: compassion, selflessness, and a willingness to sacrifice themselves for the future. Today, when we speak of the Leningrad blockade, we often recall statistics. 900 days of siege, hundreds of thousands dead from hunger and cold, thousands of tons of provisions delivered via the road of life. But behind these numbers stand specific human destinies, especially poignant when it comes to children. Former blockade survivor Irina Zimneva, who was 6 years old at the beginning of the blockade, says, "The most terrible memory is not hunger and cold, but how quickly we, children, grew up. We stopped laughing, playing, dreaming. We thought only of food and warmth. The war stole our childhood. But those people who saved us, evacuated us across Ladoga, restored our faith that we would still be happy." In modern Russia, preserving the memory of the Leningrad blockade and the children's rescue operation has become an important part of historical policy. Museum exhibitions dedicated to this topic have been created. Courage lessons are held in schools, and documentary and feature films are produced. A special place is occupied by the Quote One Museum on the shore of Lake Ladoga, which houses unique exhibits related to the evacuation of Leningrad residents. In the 2000s, hundreds of memoirs were recorded from surviving participants of those events. Drivers who accompanied children's convoys, nurses who worked at reception points, and the children themselves who survived the evacuation. These testimonies became invaluable historical material, allowing for the reconstruction of the details of the rescue operation. Diaries and drawings by blockade children hold particular value. Some are preserved in state archives, others in family collections. These simple pencil sketches and uneven lines of children's handwriting tell more about the blockade and evacuation than official documents and statistical reports. For modern children, the story of their peers' rescue from besieged Leningrad becomes an important lesson. It teaches them to value peace, respect the heroism of previous generations, and understand what true courage and humanity mean. In schools in St. Petersburg and many other cities, meetings are held with former blockade children, and excursions are organized to places associated with the blockade and the road of life. The history of the evacuation of children from Leningrad also has an international dimension. Many countries recognize this feat as one of the most heroic humanitarian operations of World War II. Museums of the Holocaust and war crimes in various countries around the world feature exhibits dedicated to the Leningrad blockade and the rescue of children. The study of the history of the blockade and the evacuation of children continues today. Historians are finding new documents, testimonies, and photographs that help to complete the picture of those events. Each new fact, each new name of a rescued child or a hero rescuer is another stroke in the overall picture of the people's heroism during the war years. The story of the rescue of Leningrad children across Ladoga is not only a page from the past, but also a lesson for the present and future. It reminds us that in the most difficult times, humanity and care for children remain the highest values. It teaches us that true heroism often manifests itself not in grand feats, but in the daily performance of one's duty, in the readiness to risk oneself for others. The memory of the rescued children of besieged Leningrad is the memory of the triumph of life over death, of the victory of humanity over the brutality of war, of the strength of spirit of a people who, even in the most terrible times, thought of the future and did everything to make that future come true.